What if your wedding day was also your funeral? For some medieval brides, this wasn't a story whispered around fires. It was real. It was ritual. Legends across Europe tell of brides dressed in white, led not to feasts, but to their graves. The veil became a shroud. The marriage bed became a coffin. Archaeologists have unearthed chilling evidence. Skeletons of young women in bridal jewelry, buried not with husbands but alone, sometimes in shallow graves, sometimes with bones bent, hands clawing upward, as though they woke beneath the earth and fought to breathe. The symbolism was brutal. A bride was purity. A bride was sacrifice. A bride could be offered to gods, to curses, even to the soil itself. To medieval minds, life and death danced together. Marriage was not only a union of two souls, it was a transaction. And if the price demanded blood, it was the bride who paid. Imagine standing at the altar, knowing the vows you spoke might seal you into the ground, your wedding song fading into muffled silence, as the earth swallows you whole. These weren't random acts of cruelty, they were rituals. They carried meaning, and they terrified everyone who witnessed them. Tonight we'll descend into those rituals, into the medieval obsession with sacrifice, purity, and burial. We'll follow the stories of brides entombed alive, and uncover why their deaths were seen not as murder, but as tradition. The idea of the buried bride didn't appear overnight. It came from older shadows. In pagan Europe, sacrifice was a currency. The earth was alive. It demanded offerings. Blood fed the soil, and the soil fed the people. To ensure a harvest, some villages buried animals beneath the fields, but others whispered of darker offerings, human ones, and what better gift to the earth than purity itself? A virgin, a bride. In Norse sagas, maidens were offered to rivers, drowned to appease restless spirits. Among the Slavs, tales speak of young women bricked into walls, to keep a fortress from collapsing. In Celtic lands, folklore lingers of brides buried at thresholds, believed to protect the home from evil. By the Middle Ages, Christianity tried to stamp these rituals out, but the old fears never died. They hid in superstition, in whispers, in rituals twisted to look respectable. The wedding veil, the bridal white, symbols of death as much as purity. A bride was already halfway to a ghost. Some medieval texts even warn of brides cursed to walk with the grave upon them. A chilling image, a woman celebrated in daylight, entombed by nightfall. Archaeology confirms the legends. Graves in Poland, Hungary, and Italy reveal young women dressed for marriage, buried in haste, their ornaments intact, their bodies sometimes disturbed, as if burial wasn't the end, but a beginning of something darker. The question was never if someone would be offered, it was who, and for reasons of purity, ritual, and power, it was almost always the bride. The first records are not myths. They are written, and they are chilling. In 12th century Bohemia, a noble bride was promised to a rival clan. The wedding procession never reached the church. Instead, she was led to a pit outside the village, her veil pulled down, her body lowered. They believed her burial would end a feud, but locals whispered the ground never stayed quiet. In Hungary, archaeologists uncovered a bride beneath the threshold of a great hall. Her bones faced outward. She was placed there as a guardian, a human wall, her sacrifice binding the building against fire and war. For centuries people claimed to hear her footsteps when storms shook the earth. In Venice, a plague-stricken bride met a darker fate. She was accused of carrying death. Her family buried her alive beneath a chapel floor. Her gown became her shroud. Centuries later, masons uncovered her skeleton, a rosary still crushed against her ribs, as if she had prayed until her final breath. These were not hidden murders. They were rituals, public, witnessed. Each spade of dirt part of the ceremony. The bride was not seen as a victim. She was an offering, a bride for the grave. But not all were sacrifices. Some were punished, condemned to the earth as judgment. Not every buried bride was a sacrifice. Some were condemned. In parts of medieval Germany, a woman accused of adultery could be sentenced to a death wedding. She was dressed in white, crowned with flowers, led through the streets as if to a church. But instead of vows, she was lowered into the ground. Villagers threw soil as witnesses. It was justice disguised as ritual. In Scandinavia, sagas tell of brides who broke betrothals. To dishonor a marriage contract was to dishonor families. Some were buried alive at the edge of fields, marked as both warning and curse. Their voices, it was said, echoed in the wind long after. And in England, darker superstitions grew. Women accused of witchcraft were sometimes married to the earth. The burial was symbolic. The coffin nailed shut like a wedding chest. The grave treated as the husband she would never escape. Each punishment shared a theme. The bride was property. Her body belonged not to herself, but to law, to family, to ritual. Even her death had to be staged, dressed, performed. Imagine standing in a crowd, watching a young woman lowered alive into the soil. No struggle, no escape, because everyone agreed this was justice. The white veil, the flowers, the chants, all reminders that this was not simply death. It was ceremony, a twisted wedding, and the grave was her groom. Not every bride was buried in shame. Some were buried to protect. Across medieval Europe, people believed the dead could guard the living. A sacrifice could bind a spirit to a place. And who was more powerful in purity than a bride? In Eastern Europe, young women were entombed beneath thresholds, their bodies facing outward, eyes eternally fixed on the world beyond the door. They became guardians of the home. A living lock, a spirit bound to walls of timber and stone. In the Balkans, legends tell of brides placed inside foundations of bridges, their deaths believed to keep the structure from collapsing. Without the offering, it was said, the river would swallow the bridge whole. Even today, folklore lingers of women's voices beneath the waters. In some villages, a bride was buried at the edge of fields, her death thought to bless the harvest, to give fertility through her own lost future. Crops grew, people feasted, but her name was never spoken again. The horror lies not only in the burial, it lies in the meaning. The community did not see her as destroyed, they saw her as transformed, her life given so their lives could continue. A threshold, a wall, a field, a bridge. Her body turned to stone, soil, and silence. Her spirit chained forever to the living. And when storms broke the sky, or crops failed, or bridges cracked, villagers whispered that the bride stirred beneath them, restless, watching. Imagine it. The crowd fades, the last voice drifts away, and you are alone. The coffin closes, the darkness is absolute. Your breath turns heavy, hot, each inhale steals the air faster. At first you scream, you claw at the wood, you pound until your nails split, your fingers bleed. But the earth swallows every sound, no one hears, no one answers. The soil presses down, it creaks in the coffin lid, it squeezes into cracks, settling across your skin, heavy, suffocating, alive. Your lungs burn, your heartbeat slams against your ribs. You beg for a miracle, you pray for release, but the only answer is silence. Some skeletal remains show twisted arms, ribs snapped from struggling in the dark, hands frozen in claws, reaching upward, proof that some brides woke beneath the soil and died gasping for light that never returned. The medieval mind accepted this horror. They saw it as a passage, a ritual of transformation. The bride became earth. Her body turned from flesh to soil, her soul from woman to guardian. But imagine the last thought before the silence, the last breath before the earth filled her lungs. Not love, not hope, only the terror of knowing the grave was her groom. The church preached against pagan sacrifice. It condemned the burial of the living, but old customs were stubborn. They crept into Christian weddings, they hid in plain sight. The white gown, the veil, the ringing of bells, symbols of purity, but also of mourning. To the villagers, a bride was not only a wife, she was a soul crossing between worlds. Some priests quietly allowed strange rites. A bride laid beneath the church threshold, as if blessed by holy ground. A prayer spoken not for her life, but for her death. The ritual disguised as piety. Even sermons carried shadows. Medieval preachers warned brides that they must die to their old lives. The vow of obedience sounded holy, but in villages steeped in superstition, it could become literal. A bride's death framed as her final vow. Churchyards themselves tell the story. Some graves hold young women in bridal jewelry, buried near altars, not beside husbands, but beneath the floors where masses echoed, her ghost chained to stone and scripture. The church tried to erase the practice, but whispers of buried brides spread faster than sermons, because the image was unforgettable. A girl in white, taken at her purest moment, sealed into the earth like a relic. And though priests condemned it, the villagers kept digging, kept burying, kept believing that a bride's silence could protect them all. The bodies may have rotted, but the stories never did. In Poland, villagers warned of the Panna Młoda pod ziemią, the bride beneath the ground. Her ghost was said to rise on storm nights, dragging her veil through the mud, whispering curses at those who broke their vows. In Hungary, farmers told children to stay away from the old hall thresholds. They said the bride buried in the foundation still waited. Step across her grave at midnight, and you would hear her nails scratching in the wood below. In Italy, sailors spoke of the Venetian bride buried during the plague. When the tide was high, they swore her figure appeared in chapel windows, draped in a gown soaked with seawater, eyes black, watching, waiting for another to take her place. Even in England, echoes survived. Tales of women married to the earth became ghost stories told at hearths. A bride who walked the lanes in silence, her veil fluttering though there was no wind. These legends weren't just entertainment, they were warnings. Every tale reminded people of what could happen when ritual turned cruel, when purity became sacrifice, when love was swallowed by earth. The buried bride became a symbol of fear, of obedience, of a silence no scream could ever break. And though centuries passed, her image lingered. White gown, cold soil, eyes forever open in the dark. The buried bride was never just one woman. She was a symbol, a warning, a ritual carved into flesh and earth. To the medieval mind, she was purity offered to gods, a punishment carved in soil, a guardian chained beneath stone. Her death meant order, her silence meant peace. But beneath the ritual lay a truth more horrifying. The bride had no choice. Her body was not her own. Her life could be bartered, buried, erased, and the community applauded as the soil swallowed her. Centuries later, the graves remain, buns in bridal jewelry, coffins clawed from within, silent proof of ceremonies too cruel to forget. We tell these stories as folklore now, as ghost tales, as fragments of a darker Europe, but the fear remains familiar. The fear of being silenced, of being buried before your voice is heard. The image lingers, a young woman, dressed in white, the crowd cheering, the coffin closing, her last breath stolen by earth. Her wedding day became her funeral. Her groom was the grave, and history remembers her, not as a bride, but as a warning carved in soil. Medieval brides were not the only ones buried alive. History hides even crueler weddings, kings and queens. Join us, and step deeper into the grave of forgotten stories.